The wind moaned low through the corridors of Montelva Manor, threading through broken shutters and weeping against the stained-glass windows like a soul denied rest. Winter had returned early to the northern province of Aragon, and with it came the scent of rain-drenched stone, damp velvet, and the quiet hush of a house too grand to forget and too empty to remember. Duke Elías de Montelva sat hunched beneath a mound of wool blankets, his once commanding frame reduced to angles and hollows. He had ruled this estate like a king before the war, his word was law, his gaze enough to silence fools. But now, his limbs trembled when he reached for his goblet. His voice, once deep as thunder, was a whisper of parchment on fire. The halls that had once echoed with music and the rustle of silk now carried only the soft ticking of a failing clock and the brittle coughs of a man too proud to die quietly. He summoned his steward and gave an order, his voice no louder than the flicker of a dying flame: "Send word to the village. 1,000 gold reals. For a night of kindness. No details. No promises. No strings. Only that she be kind." The parchment, sealed with the Montelva crest, traveled from door to door, passed beneath hands calloused by salt and grain and prayer. In the taverns, men scoffed and laughed into their ale. Women exchanged glances, some pitted, others bitter. No one dared answer. Not after what the Duke had become. Except Ana Beltrán. She read the notice as she crushed dried marjoram beneath her palm in the apothecary's cellar. The dust clung to her knuckles. Her fingertips were stained green from herbs, and her dress smelled of camphor and crushed leaves. She folded the parchment once, then again, and tucked it into her apron. Ana was a girl of uncertain lineage. Her mother, a Romani healer, had died when Ana was 12. Her father, if he was the soldier her mother claimed, never returned from the frontier. She'd grown in the shadows of other women's kitchens, in the pages of books stolen from market stalls, and in the silence of her own thoughts. She knew pain. She knew silence. But more than anything, she knew kindness. That night, thunder rolled across the mountains like a warning. The wind howled through the olive trees. Still, she pulled her worn shawl over her shoulders and set out, boots squelching in the mud, the letter clutched like a promise in her fist. When she reached the manor gates, lightning split the sky in jagged fury, illuminating the crest carved into the stone, a wolf curled around a crown. The butler opened the door after a long pause, his eyes falling to her dress, her shoes, the way her hair clung to her face in wet strands. He said nothing. Just nodded and led her inside. The house was a mausoleum of fading grandeur. Dust clung to chandeliers like cobwebs. Oil paintings wept in their cracked frames. The scent of old violets lingered beneath the mildew and candle wax. The butler's footsteps were soft against the worn carpet as he led her up the staircase, past mirrors that reflected only fragments of her. At the end of the corridor, beneath heavy emerald curtains, the Duke waited. He looked older than the stories. His silver hair was thin to wisps. His skin clung to his cheekbones like wax dripped too long in the flame. But his eyes, though dulled by pain, still carried the depth of command. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, smiled. "You are not what I expected," he said. "Nor were you," she replied. He gestured for her to sit. She took the wooden chair beside his bed. It creaked beneath her, and for a moment they sat in silence, the storm outside filling the space between their breaths. "Your hands," he said softly. "They're rough." "I grind roots," she said. "Some bite back." He laughed, a dry, brittle sound, and then coughed until his ribs shook. She rose, pouring water from a crystal pitcher into a goblet and offered it to him. His fingers brushed hers. Cold. Thin. Alive. He asked about her village, and she told him. About the almond trees that bloomed pink in March. About the children who dared each other to cross the broken bridge over the ravine. About how the market smelled of jasmine and dried figs in summer. She spoke, and he listened, not as a duke, but as a man clutching onto the echo of life. In return, he told her of the sea. How it looked from the cliffs of Galicia at dawn. Of opera nights in Madrid when he was young and foolish. Of a woman named Lucía who had once taught him how to weep. "She died," he said. "Before I learned how to stop missing her." Ana said nothing. She didn't need to. He drifted in and out of sleep, his fingers never leaving hers. Once, deep in the night, he stirred and whispered, "Lucía." She stiffened, but did not pull away. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, time folded itself around the two of them. She watched the candle melt low, the shadows of its flame dancing across the canopy above him. She did not sleep. She did not move. She stayed until the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, and the storm faded into memory. He woke with the sun, eyes blinking against the gold. "You're still here," he murmured. "I said I'd stay until morning." And beyond. She rose without answering. He tried to sit up, but the effort drew a wheeze from his chest. The butler arrived, silent as always, and offered her a satchel. Heavy. She took it, unsure if it was meant to reward her silence, her patience, or the warmth of her voice in the dark. "I do not expect you to return," the Duke said. "But I hope you do." Ana looked at him, then at the satchel. "It was not the gold," she said, her voice barely more than air. "You asked for kindness. That costs nothing." He closed his eyes. She turned, walked down the corridor where her reflection had vanished from the mirrors. The scent of violets still lingered. As she passed the great hall, she heard the clock chime once. A single, heavy note. Outside, the world had changed. The trees were slick with rain. The earth glistened. Birds had returned to the trees. She stepped into the light, the satchel pulling at her shoulder. She never intended to return. But the moment she stepped through the gates of Montelva, she knew. Her heart had never left. The days grew longer, but Ana felt no warmth in them. Spring crept across the tiled roofs and stone paths of the village, painting almond trees in pale blossoms and filling the markets with new laughter. Yet Ana moved through it all like a woman underwater, present, but unreachable. She still worked in the back room of the apothecary, hands stained green and brown from herbs and tinctures, but her gaze often drifted toward the window, toward the hills, toward something no one else could see. The townspeople noticed. They always noticed. Rumors swirled like chimney smoke. Some said she had taken the gold and hidden it beneath the old well, others claimed she'd seduced the Duke with sorcery. But none dared ask her. Her silence was not cold, it was sacred. And in time, the whispers died as all things do when met with dignity. Then one morning, as she sorted sprigs of rosemary into bundles, a boy arrived with a letter. No wax seal. Just a single dried violet pressed into the fold. The scent caught in her throat before the words ever did. The nights are colder without kindness. If you still have warmth, let it return. Her hands trembled as she read it once, then again. She said nothing to the apothecary. She simply took off her apron, wrapped herself in her shawl, and walked. The path to Montelva was familiar now. The trees seemed less cruel, the stones less jagged. The wind, though brisk, no longer howled but hummed, a low, knowing tune. The butler met her at the same gate, older somehow, yet unchanged. He did not lead her through the grand double doors this time. Instead, he opened a narrow side entrance that smelled of lemon oil and worn pages. It was the servants' hall. She understood. Up the stairs, through the quiet corridors, she stepped back into the chamber that had once held only sickness and shadows. But now, a fire glowed in the hearth. The curtains were drawn wide. And the Duke, Elías, looked up from a worn book with eyes that remembered. "I feared I had imagined you," he said, voice thinner than she recalled, but steadier. She stepped closer. "Then let me be real again." He offered her the book. "I cannot read without breath. Will you?" She took it gently, as if it might crumble. It was leather-bound, its edges gold-leafed, its spine nearly broken with time. Poetry. She read the first stanza slowly, then the next. Her voice cracked midway through a line about lost swans and river mist, but she kept going. She read until dusk blurred the words, until the shadows climbed the walls and kissed the tapestries, until the candles bloomed one by one in the sconces around them. At some point, his hand found hers. Light as frost. She let it linger. From that night on, she came again. And again. The visits were no longer marked by gold or parchment. Only by rhythm. Every few days, she would disappear from the apothecary with the fading of the sun and return before dawn's first light, her hair smelling faintly of lavender and smoke. The manor accepted her like it had been waiting. No words were spoken in the halls. The butler nodded, the cook pretended not to notice the extra place setting returned to the scullery. She never entered through the front again. The side door became her portal, and the Duke's chamber her world. There were nights they spoke of nothing at all. He would lie in his chair, cloaked in velvet, his eyes tracing the flames, while she sat at the foot of his bed sewing or simply watching the firelight dance. Other nights, he would talk, his voice fragile, but not weak. He told her about Lucía. She wore yellow always, he said once, his fingers absently folding a piece of ribbon. Said it made the sun less lonely. Ana smiled. Was she your wife? She was meant to be. The words fell like stones in still water. She was a seamstress's daughter. Laughed like she had stolen the stars. I would have given her the world, but the world would not give her me. He paused. The storm of 72. She tried to cross the river to meet me. They found her 3 days later, tangled in the roots beneath the chapel bridge. Ana reached for his hand. I see her in your smile, he whispered. But you are not her. She expected sadness. Instead, there was a strange peace in his eyes. You are, the ache I never expected. His fingers brushed her cheek. And she let him. The line between their stations, once as solid as carved marble, blurred under the weight of quiet nights and shared silences. She knew what the world would say if it knew. That she was a fool. That he was a desperate man clinging to youth. But nothing about their nights felt desperate. They felt inevitable. She read him poems until her voice faded. He asked her to describe the shape of clouds from the tower window, to sing the folk songs her mother used to hum while washing clothes in the river. He had paintings brought from the gallery just so she could tell him what they made her feel. He said her thoughts tasted sweeter than wine. And sometimes, when the candlelight grew soft and the hush of the manor wrapped them like a secret, he would lean toward her, and the world would still. His lips met hers once. Then again. The fire crackled. The clock did not strike. Even the wind outside held its breath. In those moments, there were no crowns. No ledgers. No lineage. Only the touch of skin against skin, the brush of soul against soul, and the wild, unspoken knowledge that what they held was not permitted, but it was real. When she left him, she left with no gold, no proof. Only the echo of his breath in her hair and the knowledge that something holy had bloomed in the ruins of what once was. Back in the village, the apothecary asked no questions. The townsfolk watched her more closely now, sensing change but unable to name it. Only Ana knew. She had returned once for a letter. But now, she returned for him. Spring came loud and sudden, bursting through the hills like a marching band. The manor, long a silent tomb, awoke with the shuffle of linens, the scent of lemon oil, and the clatter of silver being polished for the first time in years. Windows were thrown open. Tapestries were beaten against the wind. The great hall, which had not seen music since the war, echoed again with the sounds of life. Montelva would host a banquet. Invitations were penned in golden ink and sent with haste, barons from Barcelona, marquises from Seville, distant cousins from Naples who remembered only the title, not the men. Word spread fast, the Duke of Montelva, long thought withering and near death, was summoning the court once more. They came not for loyalty, but curiosity. To glimpse a ghost. To sip from crystal goblets and whisper about decline behind silk fans. Elias did not care. He had only one reason. He wanted her beside him. Ana listened quietly as he told her. They sat beneath the half-lit chandelier in his study, the fire between them more for comfort than warmth. They will laugh, she said, her voice barely a breath. They will not see me. They will see what I show them, he replied. You cannot make me belong. I can try. She turned her face from him, and in the shadow he could not see the wet shimmer rising in her eyes. They will never see me as more than shadow. He reached across the table, placed his hand over hers. Then I shall burn the sun for you. For 3 nights she did not sleep. Her fingers stitched as though her life depended on it. The dress was pale blue, the shade of a quiet sky before storm. Every hem, every seam was made with thread she'd bartered for in the market, offered in exchange for remedies and silence. It was not silk, but it moved like water. When the night came, the manor blazed with light. Torches flickered in the courtyard. The trees had been draped in garlands. The sound of wheels on gravel echoed from every side of the estate as carriages arrived, heavy with powdered wigs and perfume. Ana stood at the edge of her reflection in a gilded mirror. The blue gown clung to her as if it, too, feared what lay ahead. She took one last breath, then descended the staircase. The room fell silent. The Duke waited at the base, tall despite his cane, dressed in a dark coat that shimmered with thread of gold. He offered his arm. She took it. Gasps rippled like fish through still water. Together, they entered the hall. Eyes followed. Lips twitched behind lace gloves. Jewels trembled on thin necks as heads turned to whisper. She felt it in her skin, the scrutiny, the disdain, the hunger to tear. She held her head high. Dinner passed in a blur. Gold plates, pheasant stuffed with figs, wine as dark as sin. But Ana tasted none of it. She sat at Elias's side, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, a stillness carved from glass. The room was full of ghosts in brocade, those who had once courted Lucía, who had dined at these same tables when Ana was a child hiding from the rain under church eaves. Now they feasted again, their forks clinking and their words sharp as ever. She could feel their stares like frost creeping beneath her gown. And then, the voice. "Ah, the famous kindness," said Countess Bellavia, her voice high and sweet and poisonous. She raised her glass with mock reverence. "I suppose 1,000 coins buys more than a smile these days." Laughter followed. Quiet, but enough. The air left Anna's lungs. Elias turned, fury lighting his features, but Ana was already rising. The chair scraped loudly behind her. Her slipper caught on the edge of the carpet, but she didn't stumble. She walked with dignity through the hall, through the laughter, through the hush that followed it. He called her name once. She did not turn. Outside, the spring night had soured. Rain kissed the petals of the almond blossoms, and the gravel path had turned to mush beneath her thin shoes. She walked blindly, tears and raindrops tracing down her cheeks with equal silence. Behind her, the Duke followed, his cane striking stone, his breath ragged with effort. "Ana, Ana, wait." But she was already at the gate. She pressed her hand to the iron latch and looked back once, not at the house, not at the guests, but at him. And in his eyes, she saw not a duke. Not a man with gold and ghosts and regret. Only a man who had dared believe love could silence a world trained to mock it. She fled into the dark, the sound of carriages and violins fading behind her, the mud clinging to her hem like the weight of everything she could never be. Inside, the hall resumed its charade. The nobles raised their glasses once more. But the Duke's chair remained empty. His gaze never returned to them. The sound of breaking glass echoed sharply against the stone walls of the apothecary. Ana stood frozen, shards of a shattered vial glittering at her feet like tiny, cursed stars. The butler stood before her, drenched in rain and desperation, his hands trembling, his breath stolen by urgency. "His Grace," he said, voice catching. "He's dying." The words cracked something in her chest that had already been breaking slowly, day by day, since she fled the manor that night. She had tried to forget the sound of his voice calling her back. She had tried to drown the memory of his eyes, how they followed her into the dark. But there was no silence deep enough to bury love. She didn't speak. She simply ran. The road to Montelva was slick with mud and memory. The trees leaned like mourners, their blossoms beginning to fall in soft, white sheets. Her slippers were soaked before she reached the gate, her shawl plastered to her shoulders like a second skin. But she did not slow. The manor rose before her, vast and unmoving, a monument of silence. Inside, the house was still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Candles burned low in the hallway sconces, their flames tall and still. The scent of violets lingered, faint and sweet, woven into the very stones of the place. The butler said nothing as he led her through the halls. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were red. The door to the Duke's chamber stood open. He lay beneath a canopy of dark green velvet, the drapes parted as if to welcome her. His frame was gaunt, thinner than she remembered, the lines of his face carved deeper by time's cruelty. His hands rested above the covers like relics of a man who had once ruled with them. But when he saw her, his eyes brightened. Not with surprise. With something far gentler. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice no louder than a breath. Ana crossed the room in 3 steps and fell to her knees beside the bed. Her hands found his, cold but not lifeless. "I never meant to shame you," he rasped. "Only to love you." Her tears came hot and fast, soaking the silk at his wrist. "And I loved you. From the first moment you asked me not for beauty, but for kindness." He smiled. It hurt him, but he did. He lifted her hand to his chest, pressing it lightly against the slow, fragile beat beneath his ribs. "You were the kindness," he whispered. "You were the fortune." She climbed onto the bed beside him, careful not to jostle his bones, and curled herself gently against him. Her cheek rested above his heart. Her hand remained in his. And then, in the hush that followed, she began to speak. She told him the things she'd never said, the way his voice had filled the hollow places inside her, the way his mind had opened windows in her world she hadn't known existed. She spoke of the future they'd never live and the garden she would have planted for him, full of violets and rosemary and almond trees. She told him how it felt to be seen for the first time, not as lesser, not as poor, not as scandal, but as someone worth remembering. She spoke until her throat burned and he could no longer reply. His eyes fluttered once. Then again. And finally, they did not open. But his fingers, even in death, did not release hers. When the servants entered at dawn, the room was golden. The light stretched across the Duke's lifeless frame like a benediction. His face was calm, the corners of his mouth turned slightly upward, as though he'd just finished speaking a truth only Ana had heard. She lay beside him, her eyes closed, her face streaked with tears, but smiling. They buried him beneath the chapel oaks, where the roots grew deep and the violets returned every spring. Nobles sent wreaths from every province, but it was the villagers who stood weeping at the gates. Some had only seen him from a distance. Some had hated him once. But all had heard of the woman who had held his hand until his final breath. Montelva Manor did not pass to a cousin or a distant heir. Instead, it opened its doors. The Duke's will, penned in his own hand, left the estate to the people, its fields for the hungry, its halls for the orphaned, its riches scattered like seed. Ana did not take a title. She did not wear black. She planted the garden he'd never lived to see, and every year, without fail, the violets bloomed thicker than the last. No one called her Duchess. But in every whispered tale told beneath a spring wind, she lived. The girl who answered a letter. The girl who gave a night of kindness. And the girl who found, in a dying duke's fragile heart, a forbidden love that outlived them both.